As long as it works. Like I haven't done anything that's touching my computer. I don't know if it can or if it can problem.
I'm gonna go. All right.
You guys ready?
Did you send the Zoom link someone?
No. The Zoom link.
Just send it and we'll just text. Right.
All right. Appreciate it.
And we'll start the train.
I don't know if I need to let them.
Do you have Slack open somewhere?
Yeah, right there.
Oh, there it is. Sweet. Oh, your shit's touchscreen, my boy.
Mhm.
Damn.
Well, Marie would use it sometimes, but it would fuck up whenever the document was spreading. So it'd be,
Yeah, does it go all the way around too?
yeah, it's good to be a tablet as
That's
well.
cool. That's cool.
Fantastic.
Eric, wave your hand. All right. Yeah. That or kind of in there.
You know what? That's
Yeah.
It's different. Okay, I'm gonna go out in the hall. And then to test this out. So Roy and Eric, you talk for like 2:30. Why do they talk and I don't? Well, I can hear Eric and him kind of middle. Should be able to hear you.
All right.
You have to let me in.
There you go.
Eric, if I ask you a cross-sex question, what do you think about that?
I don't like the answer.
What if I ask you convict light or what?
I don't like it.
Agree. Yeah. You all good?
Yeah.
Yeah. Judge. I'm gonna get some water and then go. The advantage is deterrence. Climate change is real, anthropogenic, and causes extinction. Ecological shifts are irreversible, and cascade globally absent emissions mitigation free in all 23. Due to past emissions of GHGs, Earth's climate system is being negatively impacted by global warming. The most populated areas are to experience confronting irreversible ecological shifts, eutrophication, destructive natural phenomena. Human cultures become extinct, freshwater susceptible to human diseases, severe reduction in quantity of CO2, atmospheric carbon dioxide level posts, and the long-lasting effects across biological timescales. These changes are expected to speed up in the business casual situation. New shifts are relying need for community to act to decrease additional atmospheric emissions, and the U.S. is modernizing its nuclear arsenal, but climate change threatens all legs of the tried and collapses deterrence. Kwong 23. U.S. investing billions to touch trillions to modernize its nuclear arsenal to do these plans account for climate change potential mission, altering impacts on the nation's deterrent climate, effects such as sea level rise, extreme weather and warmer temperatures present challenges and threats detrimental on each like effect-based capacities to serve SSBN's accessibility of ICBM silos facilities and risk of bombers and threat multiplier special attention must be given to this threat given the stakes even the possibility of these impacts requires serious high-level consideration, and deterrence failure escalates into all theaters of conflict, nuclear, conventional, and biological. Heinrichs et al. Just Heinrichs 21. Nuclear forces complement conventional and provide backstop and nuclear deterrence signals. Should they attack with conventional, they will not do so. And hope the U.S. backs down military rely heavily when they project power, failing and risk nuclear weapons against soil, employing chemical or biological weapons. Nuclear capabilities most effectively deter war, and should deterrence fail to win as quickly as possible. And extinction avid. 21. Biological weapons are the most dangerous. WMD cause epidemics, destroy water and soil, crops and livestock, biodiversity in the environment, low cost and rapid spread, easy preparation, transport, and use by weapons, spread germs, and contaminate different organisms. One is able to kill 8 million within 6 hours. Diseases. Now, the main drivers of extinction is species vaccines on the available and inadequate quantities to cope with the disease outbreak failure, which are attacks and lead to extinction, and uniquely sea level rise, flooding, and other extreme events. Deck U.S. submarine capabilities. Kwong 23. Naval Sub-18 Kings Bay's hub of the SSBN fleet, given its location, sea level rise, and flooding post-grade. Challenges to the sea like under high emissions pathway warming contribute to the increase in severity of hurricanes, atmospheric and oceanic conditions, encourage rain and stronger winds, substantial impacts of short-term surge on Kings Bay, the usability of land effect roads, connecting to particular operations, which requires reliable routes that are transported the trending D5 to and from SSBN's implications for the SSBN mission disrupt capacity to service and maintain habit, the ability to compete broader deterrence to assure capability to launch a nuclear strike anywhere, anytime, undermining stealth and health, climate change implications, stand increased vulnerability of the most survivable leg of the triad, and they're the bedrock of preventing nuclear war. Miller 19. Credibility of conventional forces is built upon effective nuclear deterrent. The triad has sustained the test of time, separate attack, as in this alert of postures and different base and motives presented enemy offenses with insurmountable obstacles. SOBM was a game changer. U.S. strategic deterrent, reducing SSBN, reduced patrol area on target coverage, undercut the deterrent capability of SSBN force. Modern nuclear deterrent capability to allies and enemies would be vital to national security. SSBN is essential. Colombia remains top priority. We're delivering just in time. The case for Colombia SSBN is a strong investment. Ensure the U.S. deterrent, prevent nuclear war, and second strike. Preserve bad between superpowers. 21. Relevant to nukes, most especially sub-naval power, becoming a major factor in the balance of power, given the critical role in sub-nukes is ensuring that between superpowers, naval power to make it possible to nuclear powers to deter first strike and second strike capability guarantees retaliation, and SSBNs ensure quick threat response. -20. Subsequent second strike in any armed control scenario, U.S. must preserve SSBN force. SSBNs are given freedom to operate in large areas in the region to maintain communications while undetected that enables them to respond within minutes to crew routine, enables survival, posture, and climate change. Forces trade-offs with naval power. Reinhardt and Toffel 17. Run multiplies aggregated environmental degradation, political instability, and social tensions that enable terrorist activity and violence. Climate change. Increased demand for Navy's military and humanitarian services. Arctic melting clear way for opportunities for conflict. Climate impaired capacity to deliver services. Damage to the network of bases and ports on which it depends to maintain readiness will increase a one-time bump, but a continuous accelerating process, and that collapses U.S. assurances. Line 23. SSBN survivability to strike against Washington ballistic missile submarines have been the last guard of guard virtually invulnerable to surprise attack. They are part of the U.S. second strike. Allies looking for clear signals in the U.S. commitment to become less enamored of the non-nuclear Navy, especially assuring that Indo-Pacific if the U.S. wasn't going to contribute nuclear assurance. Who was a strategic bomber's effect was a mono-pedal fortifice assure allies of commitment to extending nuclear deterrent. Japan sees SSBN as a form of assurance and escalates and culminates in extinction. Do you have the one I see? I don't have the off. I got it. DOS 20. New confrontations in southeastern middle provide unstable, smaller arsenals are vulnerable chance. Great power special orders programs of proliferation. Nuclear countries are close forcing reaction to anti-air retaliatory capabilities, predation acquiring weapons that make states aggressive because instability paradox to leave them freer to engage in conventional each newly armed adds to the chance of apocalypse, and a strong U.S. Navy solves a host of conflicts and maintains peace. Masters 19. Roles in Navy series depend on its capabilities. U.S. Navy deploys assault forces maritime water search and rescue. Several interrelated capabilities demonstrated precision command, power protection, threatening direct strikes against targets for sustained periods. Maritime security protects global trade, environmental protection, and other law enforcement powers. Long use Navy's influence behaviors of allies and adversaries during times of peace or support. Restore deterrent. The U.S. Navy led NATO, and the Navy is a cornerstone of U.S. military alliance. And bomber missions are being compromised by increased warming and weather events. Quang 23. White man home with only self-nuclear bombers by minimal experience, more heavy precipitation days lesson, indicating a likely higher frequency of flash flood events could affect bomber mission. Both challenges to the base of both base personnel and the nuclear systems means more black flag conditions negatively impact operational capacity as well as training capacity. Ground planes are at minimum effect takeoff and landing, as well as payload or fuel capacity impact radar. Absorbing skin climate change plus challenges in storage of weapons, exacerbating the risk of wildfire setting, facility and force personnel, and independently they prevent nuke wars. Eagle at all 21. Actors such as Russia, China, nuke sense for part strategy, extended deterrence is incumbent on nuclear capable bomber deployments. U.S. bomber constant deterrent and the nuclear attacks and out compared to ICBMs and subs, ability to operate freely and visibly, render of assurance, dual capable aircraft, bedrock from NATO allies, reliable deployment of U.S. bombers, lights low clear sign of U.S. resolve served as a primary tool. Now they're turning the past 75 years of peace against uncertainty, multipolar nuclear order, and Russia nuclear use causes extinction. Farquhar 17. A nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia could cause global cooling, making it impossible to grow food to the U.S. and Russia. And more than 90% of the world's nuclear risk of extinction is greater from a conflict between the U.S. and Russia, and thus the plan resolved. The United States federal government should adopt a $25 carbon tax, increasing by $25 annually with a commensurate border carbon adjustment. A carbon tax slashes emissions alternatives fail to check the environmental crisis. Comment off 24. Having emissions by 2030 requires a carbon tax starting at $25 a ton and rising annually by then among clear opportunities for climate action. We can't give, we bring emissions down without carbon pricing. Also, alas, no progress falls short, insufficiency, or even the best intention policies to meet carbon targets without robust carbon taxing can't be hidden indefinitely. The reckoning waits and spurs green innovation. Adler 14. Placing a price on carbon enhances the committed position of renewable energy relative to fossil, thus encouraging a migration away from high carbon fuels. An important step sustainable and low carbon take play a critical role in the energy revolution necessary to change our current path solar. Not only mitigates millions of emissions, but also provides economic development and job creation, and it protects the military. CT22. No means of damage caused by natural disasters to Air Force bases, operations, and other military installations. Why not address cause rather than paying for increasingly expensive losses? Emissions from burning fossil fuels is well known to be the main cause of our more unstable climate. Taxing fossil fuel companies help switch to clean energy products, protect our military operations around the world, and national security from ever increasing impacts. And the BCA is key. Jack 24. Carbon border adjustment is a bipartisan tool to cut global pollution permissible under the WTO support is strong, and the CBO would create economic incentive for important parts of the global economy. Proposals of the U.S. focus on the industrial sector and learning and imitation of nearby countries ensures follow-on. Rego and Shot 22. Carbon pricing diffuses to learning from neighboring countries and imitation. The countries tend to imitate other countries if they share similar colonial experience. Or adopters and increasingly learning from neighbors provides a step forward in mitigation. Give me the alt card. And international organizations make global implementation simple and accessible. Third, Thisted and Thisted 19. The CBLC share info and implemented carbon pricing. The World Bank provides assistance to adopting countries. The OECD has produced studies of how countries can implement price cost effectively. The World Bank serves as a platform to share knowledge. This is strong evidence indicated that PMR has helped data transform global familiarity by dispersing knowledge. International organizations succeeded in making it more accessible. And the transition from growth is either a coup or election campaign. Both are possible. Hence, 2100 capital accumulation would require control of institutions through election or a coup. No movement to have a control in the military, but otherwise end revolution. There would be a counter revolution by former elites in other countries. We're gonna cut it there. I won't just finish it. Good.
First question, why are companies incentivized to follow the plan?
Because it would be much more expensive for them to continue on their carbon footprint. Thus, in order to not deal with that, they would switch.
Do you think that profit motives from MBIs are the only way to solve green transition internal links you outlined?
Well, I don't know what you mean necessarily by green transition internal links, but the what's it called? The Commonwealth evidence says, quote, carbon targets without robust carbon taxing cannot be hidden indefinitely. We bring US emissions down without carbon pricing? Alas, no.
How do you know that the companies are going to pay the tax?
Well, we make them pay the tax.
If they don't?
If they don't, they have well, they would get charged, right?
So they just pay the tax later?
No, well, they would. What do you mean pay the tax later? They would immediately get
If I didn't
charged.
want to pay the tax, you charge.
If you didn't pay
I
the
don't
tax,
pay
the
that. What are
IRS
you
would
gonna do?
immediately hit you.
So what? What does that do?
So what? There would be a big suit
So
against
you
you.
have to wait for a whole lawsuit to plan out for the plan solvent?
No, and you
It'd be
have
really costly for the company to, they have to pay.
Does the plan
millions and
lower
millions
energy
of dollars.
prices?
plan lower energy prices. I don't know what you mean by that. The one he doesn't say it necessarily would or wouldn't. We
Sure.
think it probably
What's
wouldn't
the
in the long
bright
term.
line for how much like warming or emissions we need to cause the currents collapse?
To cause deterrence collapse?
Yeah.
Every degree matters. The more climate change and emissions run rampant,
we
the more
have, like,
extreme weather events
Whole
happen.
degrees, we're at 1.5 right now, so
Every
get to
bit,
2.5.
every bit of
You have
degree
a
matters.
bright line,
Every bit of degree matters.
so you do not have a bright line, there's no
No, our
evidence.
evidence
You
is
have
saying
not
that
presented a
climate.
piece of evidence says there's a point when deterrence becomes inoperable.
Yes, we have. We
What
said
is the
the
point?
more climate change causes things like extreme weather, etc., the less and less our subs, bombers, and ICBMs are able to be a
Solvency
credible
evidence.
deterrent.
How do you know that fossil fuel companies are responsive to price signals?
This was the same question you asked. We think all of our evidence is in the context and assumes companies
evidence?
responding to the plan.
Adler and Kamenov evidence?
Every piece of evidence that says carbon pricing slashes emissions, that's
That's
because
correct.
their evidence.
You have read someone that does traffic models and is an entrepreneur. Do you have any like actual models,
It's the
empiric?
national expert who is the former head of transportation.
What does transportation have to do with carbon taxes?
Are you kidding me? The transportation sector is huge in emissions. What are you talking
Yeah,
about?
that has nothing. How do you know that?
That has nothing.
How do you know how
What?
much domestic companies emissions produce?
Well, there's tracking methods now that
Who
we
tracks?
track their emissions.
Who
Who
tracks?
tracks?
Like,
The EPA,
okay.
right?
Uh,
And also,
How do you know that green?
Domestic.
How do you know that green innovation is safe?
how do we know green innovation is safe? Well, there's been past green innovations that haven't been unsafe. And we think it's try or die for new
If they
innovations.
haven't been unsafe, why are we worried about climate change?
What do you mean? They haven't been unsafe, doesn't mean they've solved climate change.
Alright.
You have no internal link between those two,
What's this say?
and that term is not unique.
Two case.
Where did it originally get? Is there a zero?
Yeah, so it's in logistics under the
Oh, I see.
Yeah, real quick.
yeah.
Not that one.
He's gonna finish it in 2 days, dude.
No, someone answer it.
I don't even know why I did that. Like I had like 7 more seconds on my timer. I was just done with the card. It was like add a perfect sentence, and I was
If we're ready to start, I don't really care.
I need to open it.
Nah, Russell cares. Everyone good? Oh, thank you, Eric. First off, it's the case. The one he sees Adam Smith. The reliance on the visible hand of the market makes warming inevitable by framing it as a market failure instead of a problem intrinsic to markets. The Deterrence case and emissions continue to from unchecked production. Paper 22. Liberal side of the focus sees climate change as a market failure because emissions do not account for the price of the key to market based on the climate policies. The faith in visible hand is a direct force director. Corporations consumer like to change their behavior to the notion of market failure is the belief that a problem with the climate change is not a market exchange. The confusion with regard to the relevant exchange double is believe the noisy spirit that it can about the production reveals the technical between capital and climate is the relation to the root of the climate crisis rather than the focus choices of marketplaces consumer producers control fast and those times where resources emissions all directed towards profit. The real cause of climate crisis, the minority voters have profited production, the energy flow, the materials of restriction society needs the climate struggle is not the fix, but it is not about the price. And no climate policy will affect corporations in short term is net profitable to continue emissions now and pay fines later. What's it all 24? You pointed to disposing of the waste of the creek and the carrying the water to the farm that emerges the water containing the extreme the cops came out to pointed to keep the information secret because dumping into the west of the best of financial second my thought is yes it is exactly what it should have been done in the crime pace of violates law because of your duty to maximize profit law to companies and the waste of the justice ought to make it regularly face lawsuits and fines and properly disposing of toxic waste that it could be worse than set aside the profits invested and would have enough to pay for cost benefit analysis rational when easier and efficiency set it so the delays and distorted information to corporate had information PR campaigns using studies and profit motives that cause conversion existential risk in Act 20 and narcissist fake existential threats to the crisis of products of capitalism and world facing health crisis environmental economic political and military and governmental crisis wild trade deforestation exploitation nature of capital driven healthcare to retail health crisis warming of products the capital the modernized environment of the economy integral to capitalism and austerity to recover the logic of market areas to climate legitimacy capital policies crisis opportunity for capitalist costs to dismantle democratic north to be the war sustained power and reliance on profit motive making the nuclear it makes war inevitable. 1021. Globalization unveiled interdependence and not lead to peace and imperialism and understand structural feature of capitalism never peace is never perpetual and endless pursuit of profit the Darwinian struggle unequal power to the systematic crisis of all uneven development truths is the only prelude toward the crisis and deep interstate rivalries intensified market under capitalism that creates inevitable internalities which turns case from ecosystem destruction left 21. Environmental sustainability cannot be done without adding to the same economic calculations distributing energy yields matter to energy dissipation deforestation loss of soil fertility this economy's growth and environmental degradation instrumental process cannot be valued through a marketplace of the environment. It's a cost and limited and insufficient to reverse trends economic rationality and accumulation of undermine the ecological efficiency the economic process it generates increasing entropy not only is unavailable energy but also destruction of the productive ecosystem capable of regenerating natural resources and the alternative is to affirm cost conscious and a revolutionary perspective that requires political organizing around the common experience shaped by our political economy. Counted 22. Unified cost consciousness stresses accountability and collective ego ideal, which is the numerous assets and works accountability situated in the tradition of struggle committing to revolutionary practice of Marxist ideology and acknowledgement along finding the powerful instrument uniting the struggles into where workers legitimate and regularly discuss tactics that people gravitate to practical solution struggles and negation of the capitalist for the positive balance and answers that how the cost consciousness can be achieved it's a spatial because people that dare to match local alternatives occupy lack of demands not problematic the starts and struggles involved in you collectively went to place and even to scale up at parties that educated not into idle reflections of fundamental impact understanding the interest their tyranny conditions make workers less able to spare time and energy. The important role of the parties educated the basic class and the fascist growth out of the crisis, current crisis, the fertility, and the far right tendencies to what organizing you need to mobilize the united for to maintain structures to retain to critique up or bring a revolutionary national perspective, understand the necessity of political demands of the far right builds a base of the only thing to make a revolution. They remove the fascists and the sharp end of the capitalism and the arsenal to permit itself emancipation. Next off. Market-based distributors solely transfer all traded units, carbon taxes, and non-market-based JMU UNFCCC 14. Market-based purchasers enable mitigation without an entity transfer to another entity, animates and mitigation without a line market purchase without a transfer of tradable units, MBIs, and non-MBIs, and they include carbon taxes such as restricted carbon pricing policy and they're non-market based because they numbers on trade units and vote naked MAIs and negative the market creation of the case is the core of the topic case. Deterrence theory is okay. Deterrence theory is non-falsifiable around the Canada Russia probing shelving and showing you paying modeling into why conflict is now is only meant to provide vital insurance that is so it can't stop discock accident Islamic slicing. Deterrence is climate resistant for 24. To defend the nation, the competent the DoD is undertaking a number of actions to force fostering common for decisions making the resource allocation operating decisions now incorporated into threat assessments and simulations of war funding logistics and training the top priorities building infrastructure construction resilient to severe weather energy resilience resilient commercial and microgrids and with solar and every degree matters not warrant hold the line they need to isolate a break before they get try or die and warm and slow to stabilize the McCain 19 the feedback of how to house the pathway to long term and several traffic ways and it will take centuries to compete even if it's this is far longer than their lifespan how to or the soon the temperature stabilizes above the limits of the alternatives a stable common state around 40 degrees Celsius warming this industry co-stable warming is to be honest unlikely to continue without emissions much more than capable of and time frame starts negative evidence says defense is 60 by 2036 and cooperation checks their scenario craft 22 communication communities have a mechanism to cooperate in face of common scenarios cooperative on water is more than normal the conflict the vast majority of cases the resources are shared the cooperative fashion the conflicts are worked out be interested in this water treaty in Pakistan the desire to Egypt and the British military safety negotiations best out conflict and cooperate is far cheaper than violence and intervening actors check and solve no reason they would left themselves die from warming and clean innovation backfires green paradox winter 14 this was an innovation of clean energy suddenly drops into substitute for oil this will lead to the drop in the price of oil the drop of the raise of demand of the fuels increase emissions and reverses will be sold more quickly the more you threat innovation leads to rapid extraction when we allow for feedback affects emissions can push over the innovation can lead to permanently higher tax to the first world the first best world in which carbon tax is implemented optimal allocation clean innovation can make it warring worse and then turn innovations intended to cut emissions unleashed by a weapon of nuclear cyber war and tech authoritarian extinction Albert 24 AI synthetic biology 3D printing and the LOT and robotics enhancing green energy efficiency powering green industries the solution to ecological crises greater and exacerbate other problems that promises that biology is faster than higher evolution and resistant vaccines induce population costs that present by weapons and risks pose on the digitalization of these cyber vulnerabilities intensify as LOT increases the number of network devices and you can remain apocalypse waiting to happen to become dangerous in the age of network vulnerability and for this power to the same tech will also to bring the FIR to enable unprecedented technology authority and power and accelerating clean innovation increase the vulnerability of black swan slow innovation buys time to monitor and adapt to unanticipated side effects fully 23 there's always a surprise that the casual between these issues and innovation can accumulate the new ways that innovation associated with sustainable tech, genetic communication, AI, and quantum slowing down, and it creates a resilience to speed reduces moving too quickly, recurs renewable energy to still see part of the learning curve and missing unintended costs of the more staggered transition after resilience optimized tech and for unanticipated issues, comments to prime speeding up and stability, ways of growth and collapse, and nuclear taboo which checks proliferation, capital 23. The nuclear taboo remains strong to put into the back off the threats and divisive factor to see the combination of France, UK, and the United States, and the US and the red tour kind of use of the 65 states and issued a statement issuing a threat of use of violation of the law and 147 states to declare the use of unacceptable a group of 20 inadmissible and they right defense against themselves. Nuclear war states limited countries will only shoot one or two empirically, no impact less than 20. Even if the full-scale nuclear exchange commented on that could cause extinction, people assume this is consequence of misrepresented scientific uncertainty. Only small number of papers, most from one group, with severe nuclear winter occurs. The population survived from would still be possible after 10 years. 10 years in the most of the world. One of the authors of human extinction answer he gave it a 1 in 100,000 humans are robust and greatest source of food exists given time to adapt to economic policies failed to decarbonize recurs over 25. Fossil fuels and increasing in renewables forecast a generation of fossil fuels will peak in 21. 22, 23, and 24, the generation will peak even if the only decrease the solar and failing solar and wind government design regulation markets and private account now to the narrative the obstacle to decarbonize are the policy of the MBIs and the interests are too powerful fossil fuel interests have too much power that the problem is John economic anymore the global south more important the power sectors that fail the more fossil fuel intensive and the plan mandates and rebates to individuals so they can pay for price adjusted business make it seriously effective case VR reads purple CT 22 they return the revenue to the citizens and carbon cashback rebates and these monthly payments would help people pay for higher prices and it requires open information audits which companies avoid purple when you see Alder to 14 this can be done by requiring an audit and annual audit companies of carbon emissions by accounting for instance insurance providers sharing information allowed the informed decision regarding the corporate sustainability. Also, out there is a solar entrepreneur who would just put in more business investment than before the first Trump administration. And the states where can't make renewables so profitable, so no one uses fossil fuels to add it to Pearl 24. Renewables and Australian fossil fuels are more burned each year in the market system energy. No one is guaranteed. Well, the markets have added decarbonization lobbying power to not to blame in investing in renewables. Not they're profitable capitalists firm even when states support renewable become cheaper, but affordability is reflect for investors are raised to the bottom. The energy prices not about the profitability. Last city you make the tax insolvent Stokes and McBurr 20. In Norway, which one of the highest private races emissions in oil rose by 78% because of demand elasticity in oil, and there are no easy alternatives. High taxes they won't reduce pollution. Research just said limited innovation reductions are nothing compared to what needs to be done. Pricing was likely to bring a stick to the knife fight. And other carbon compounds in untaxed sectors make high emissions inevitable. Islam 22. Do not target CT. Do not target the carbon compounds such as methane, which is large warming potential emissions, agriculture, deforestation, waste, and land use. Hard to assess and monitor. These are not taxed and non-taxed policies limited to other emissions. The market is not perfect. The consumer is not perfectly informed. Adjustment is not costless. And we're going to skip that next card. We want to see confidence in unqualified national expert on tariff models and nothing related to energy or warming. And Trump uncertainty slows market policies, especially for warming. Freeman all 25. This administration, if they disagree with the policy, to roll them back and through notice of common process, such rules and vulnerability and others and RDPR, and they become an it could become issue in countless decisions regarding permitting. Just let me get a water real quick. Whenever you're good enough.
Okay, deterrence is climate resilient.
Yeah.
Your card says the top DoD priority is taking care of its people. Hicks said that means building infrastructure such as buildings people work and live in. Where is this about the ability for the US to actually roll out SSBNs, bombers, etc.? This
Yeah.
is like we're gonna make our buildings better.
Yeah, we think those are obviously housed in buildings. It's contextual to
Those are
entire-
housed in buildings? How are subs housed in buildings?
Well, subs go to ports which have buildings.
That's fine.
above them.
Let's-
Also, we think it's contextual for the entire DoD modernization.
No, I'm done with this line of questioning. The bioweaponization card. The only line for a terminal impact in this card is nukes remain in apocalypse. Where do you think you read a terminal impact for cyber, techno-authoritarianism?
Sure, Roy.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
What was the
I'm gonna
question?
move on.
I was paying attention.
That's fine.
Great.
I want to move on.
Let's go.
Let's talk about the Ziegler re-highlight.
Sure.
It says ICBMs and subs act as deterrents for potential adversaries.
Matt,
But
you
are
blowing
they-
it? Okay.
No, okay. No, you're right. You did skip that. You're right. You went right down to loud. You're correct. Thank you, JMU. Let's talk about the CT. No, let's go to the K, the alternative. Do you feel me?
Yeah.
What do you feel?
A political imaginary. It's a
You
revolution.
fiat a political imaginary.
No,
What does that mean?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, I think that there's workers in the status quo that are dissatisfied with capitalism, already doing small organizations against it. We feel that they coalesce and strategy becomes more educational.
So you fiat some worker groups get together and educate themselves.
Well, they don't just educate themselves.
They educate others and then that, what, tears down capitalism?
Our argument is
When?
that
Like, how long does this process take?
we think it would be pretty quick to overcome.
How long is pretty quick?
capitalism. You want to see solvency advocates talk about how good sharing information work. Persuading the BCA, we think the same thing applies to the.
How does that apply to tearing down capitalism? Our
Because-
example is about tracking.
The kind of evidence says that people are dissatisfied with capitalism already, so the barrier to.
So why
spreading
haven't they already
education
torn it down?
And
Why
then
haven't they
joining
torn
the
it down?
alternative is quite low.
Why haven't they torn it down now?
We think that people are already attempting to.
So why doesn't
resist
that
capital,
solve?
so- Because it's not this organizational scale that would.
What is the scale? How many people do you need in the movement?
Think that it needs to coalesce.
To what scale? You said it's small now. What scale?
The kind of evidence says that people working together would be able to. move capital.
But aren't people working together now? You're saying every movement ever is fractured?
No.
Whatever. T, what impact do you think you're gonna?
None.
Okay, cool.
What?
Literally just say no impact to
Fairness,
T.
sir.
Literally just say no
I
impact.
think
to T.
bidirectionality.
No, you didn't say any of that. That's fine. We're moving on. Actually, let's go to I want to talk about the warrant for like deterrence theory is not falsifiable. You're like, things are escalating, can't stop miscalc or accidents. When has there like ever like been a nuclear miscalc or accident that's like happened currently? Like, you have no card for this. Why is this true? There's been no nuclear war recently. Yeah, keep going.
We just started, we can start it.
Yeah.
Ready? Yeah, we outlined the shelling of Young Island. It was a nuclear accident where shells were
What,
shot
as-
at each other.
Like, why does that mean deterrence failed?
Because nukes didn't do anything to stop
You
Turks
think-
from getting militarily striked. I don't know what else deterrence failure looks like.
Like, okay, you don't have any evidence. Fine. What?
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do. Your card that's like D-card fails, not about carbon tax. Why does it matter?
Yeah, so this is generally in the context of switching to solar and wind and other green tech. It's
Yeah,
that
but
they
it doesn't
cannot.
assume the like mechanism of the plan.
Yeah, it does, about economic incentives.
Not about a carbon
It says
tax.
It's
the
about
problem
the
is not
government.
economic. The one AC cost X is quite clear that you rely on like profit motives.
Government
So
designing and
why does that
regulating
mean this
electricity
card
markets, which are
assumes a carbon tax? That,
It says,
assumes your
quote,
internal-
government design and regulate markets. The carbon tax is an instance of
does the alt
regulating a
solve the
market.
case?
Yeah.
Does it do that?
No.
So it's not, it can never
We
do a
would-
carbon tax?
We would critique the idea.
It
of,
never
like,
does a carbon tax.
money-based profit incentive.
Money-based profit. So how do you solve climate change?
We
How do
will
you
make,
switch? Yeah. Well, question before that, do you switch to renewables?
we'll make arguments about incentives.
Do you switch to renewables?
It could,
It could or doesn't?
it could,
Will you defend renewables?
we might
Are renewables
defend that.
Are renewables good?
We think that fast innovation under capitalism is bad,
But long-term renewables are good?
not under capitalism.
Not. Okay, that's fine.
The difference is how we get there.
You still drop it.
Hmm.
Okay. Eight.
You did that, man. All right, let's do one. Excuse me.
There's case T and then the K. Anybody not reading?
Yes, sir. All right. Yeah, good.
Deterrence works. The history of nuclear arsenals and the U.S. strategy of modernization have not escalated, which means we're right writ large about the strategy of nuclear deterrence is statistically and empirically backed with short trace. 11 history gives a solid and supportive positive role played by nuclear weapons database. Nearly 70 years, no comparable evidence ever existed. There's never been a direct limited nuclear conflict between two nuclear states. What quantitative studies to show possession or reducing the likelihood of war since of war existence. 1949 proved the case in the China and India, Pakistan have acquired nuclear non significant operations. The U.S. refrained from invading Cuba, but did not hesitating ground of Panama, Iraq, to behind invaded Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Afghanistan, not an ally that China ever refrained from Taiwan, no co. Refrained from the sole alternative explanation on satisfying trade did not prevent the first global order, did not prevent the second, and the deterrence impact climate change will destroy the nuclear triad, sea level rise, flooding extreme weather, and more are offsetting and collapsing U.S. modernization everywhere. From King's Bay to Whiteman Base prevents preventing emissions rollout, training, etc. That ensures extinction because deterrence collapses and choose and are backstop to all conventional escalation fields as first CW proliferation. But CW evidence says the kills humanity via uncontrollable epidemics beyond magnified by this low cost of rapid spread, preparation, transport, and use. Now the climate impact is said it's existential. Then only the plane driving emission reductions can solve. Priya says that it destroys global food via global. It destroys the world via food, water, and air collapse, and leads to extreme weather diseases as well as migration that are existential, culminating in resource sources. Also, facts for their evidence is wrong. Priya and Priya said that near-term emissions are by 2036 are key. The race scenario is not the only impact. It's not the only. We're not required to get that far, but there was no coming back by then, which means faster is still better. That cooperation also fails when the U.S. emissions are key. That it's the highest per capita emitting country in the world. The cost is low now because of high social security environments, which means only the pressure from the planet will solve them. Green paradoxes and empirical process strengths. But all 15 the recent fossil resources will be fully accessible in the carbon tax. Post-concentration also leads to a cumulative extraction to the annual growth rate of the optimal carbon tax less than nature in the best condition for the green paradox of the annual growth rate and discount rate. The innovation term renewables another mitigation taker and broadly inevitable. The plan only speeds up the deployment of the unique impact that in the outer evidence by other countries make the impact inevitable. China, you are at the head of the green tech market and good innovation solves black swans. Their evidence is the worst case scenario in which we only develop risky tech, but obviously scientists are aware of this and will develop safeguards against them, against those risks like ops, which is then there's no warrant for how fast. It's too fast. Green innovation means the impact is inevitable because their authors assume this quote, not a carbon tax, which means you solve it in IRA. Expect climate biotech and then it's good for the environment. That's Kim 22. The IRA could translate in 38.7 billion into private sector investment in climate technology using synthetic biologies. It's all the rest of them that we can move away from positive dependency to decreasing high emissions and the repurposed land and stop pollution to symbiotic climate tech. To do the two green every part of our daily lives to further the climate legislation grassroots advocacy and youth activism more and the subs impact. There's multiple impacts, subs and Navy. First is the bedrock of preventing all nuclear and all nuclear escalation for survivability. We could quick response to extended and New Columbia and SOBMs we know adversary will get out of line. Second, collapses gas proliferation, especially in Asia, Korea, and Japan. Lines up and it says that soldier the guardrail against it, and the cornerstone of the alliance works as trials globally and ensures nuclear apocalypse. It's not checked by the taboo, but which means their evidence strong erosion. Obviously, universals means they won't feel safe. And third, the bombers impact stable bomb capacity is key to prevent the Russian nuclear war. The particular evidence says that their visibility of benefits and free operations of the are a clear sign of resolve the rhetoric of NATO that assures Russia that Russia's nuclear use when otherwise makes the global NATO no unique defense in the scenario, which is all wrong. And the missions do not being slow does not matter because the countries will still feel the threat of them being deployed at some point, which is enough. The solvency flow, the plan solves versus reduction in rising carbon tax, which lost a in our goal in the matter of a few years now is key. The carbon tax evidence says that's the best way to prevent the collapse of the military. Second is transition. Other evidence says that it's first the adoption of clean tech and low carbon innovation. Mitigates of millions of emissions is definitely credible because it cites empirics and the best studies. Third is the BCA, first global follow-on. The economic pressure and self-interest as well as bipartisan support. The Christopher's evidence is now responsive. The plan makes renewables cost effective, so it solves, which is not what their evidence is talking about. In carbon cashback argument makes no sense because people get the money back. But then people get their own money back, but they have no money to spend on carbon emissions because the companies will not get the money back. It's only individuals. No evidence for it. The companies avoiding audits means enforcement works. We get new answers if they actually work hard on it. The transition works and renewables are not additive, makes them relatively cost effective by putting a price on fossil fuels, which evidence does not assume. Empirics prove, but also prove that we were right. That was above, and innovation is huge because fossil fuels get way too expensive. Now they said that that we can't solve methane, but methane is associated with carbon emitting.
Say we do solve methane, no, they're not.
Yeah, we solve methane because it's connected to carbon emitting practices. And Trump uncertainty does not matter for warming because it puts a broad-based tax across all emissions in the economy across the economy. And Trump is not messing with IRS enforcement, which means that companies will have to pay for the plan, and there will definitely be enforcement for it. Now the T flow, they said no impact to it. We don't have to answer it. Cross-lex is binding, and they doubled down on it. CapK.
Wow.
The role of the judge to determine whether the failure of the case of the plan is everyone compared to a competitive alternative that's key to fairness in class. Otherwise, the minus someone of the one I see the case outweighs an extinction from climate change. And Deterrence brings outcomes first. It's the only irreversible impact that ends the lines of infinite future generations, which outweighs the magnitude. Case solves the terminal impacts decay. The innovation in green tech created a sustainable economy and environment, which none of their evidence assumes. Prefer solving short-term extinction rates like nuclear war for deterrence failure that happens fast and unpredictably, which means only quick policy action and mitigations can solve it. There's no reason that degrowth can solve that. Degrowing the economy or affirming class consciousness can solve it. Time frame and actor both outweigh here because even if the all hypothetically reduces emissions, it doesn't do so fast enough to protect the nuclear arsenal. It's not targeted for protecting the U.S. deterrent, so it can't solve anyway. Market K perm. People with carbon pricing while the FBI doesn't link to any criticism of market coming off in the Lucci. 20, the value of carbon taxing normative says climate data identifies who's responsible and creates a penalty in proportion to the harm and it undercuts all the bullshit around the witnesses. But free markets and the left integrate carbon pricing into market best taxes are truly the opposite of tool to attack capitalism. Perm do the act and the all the kidding solve short-term crises like deterrence and either can overcome the actions of the plan or cannot overcome the status quo. The unsustainability is a fallacy. That's Bailey 20 world's economy has grown 100-fold at poverty. Pace of reduction has greatly sped up despite ongoing population increases. The population and consumption result in exhaustion. The totality is neither no fix. The prices increase. Even less abundant incentives for new innovation, new deposits efficiency, and substitutes in the not yet running of single non-renewable resource more abundant relative to demand. The urbanization, rising incomes, economic freedom, strongly correlate with parents and aim at social capital and enable it to a flourish in modern economy. Productivity can be greatly improved. Fertilizers and pesticides. World grow much richer, stimulating its production. Improved transport. Lots of countries accelerated tree can be increased offsetting declines in the tropics to community withdrawing from the natural world. Creators stripping the species to rebound. The wars become rare and to kill fewer. More countries have become democratic, wealthy, and economically intertwined. Capitalist peace and sustainability development solves all their accumulation. More intensely in 23 findings underscore favorable association between capital accumulation and sustainable development. The initial stages emphasize the impact of accumulation on sustainable development. However, as progressive several outcomes became more evident. Our finding underscores the importance of implementing development strategies. The positive correlation highlights the necessity of making investments in capital and is imperative for nations to embrace the responsible resource management practices, market practices, and the impact. It's inevitable without a strong nuclear deterrent, which means case comes first. Deterrence works and is the only path to existential conflict in multipolar world, which means the theory of compelling the eroding nuclear arsenal from warming prevents it, and the alternative can't solve it. The alternative floating pitch for a voter that Transition for growth is impossible. We'll finish it from the one you see the chance in. 21, they have to provide for population to reduce emissions and enforce fossil fuels or counter-revolutionaries given time. For climate change, the revolution is unlikely and concentrates support transition and wrecks the environment. That's what 19 took the most of conflict of people and tribal socialists would have been limited on fossil fuel use and to support military efforts to keep the population from turning even without conflict. There's a little guarantee that moving away from it would mitigate emissions fluctuate face towards emerging people or helping the climate with even socialist leaders or the socialist leaders choose the form of the leaders who debate because have trouble staying in power and it's inevitable and self-correcting as Klotsky. 11 rights to because bureaucracies predicted by economists did not materialize. Global capitalism or be replaced by nothing. Global capitalism, traumatic events, and the destroy moments of the competitive spirit, natural human qualities will be re-energized to create a new version of capitalism that will be productive. That will be productive. Capitalism is an adaptive system that evolved in response to a changing environment. Capitalism is not accepted institutions, but an evolutionary system that reinvigorates itself through crises.
Go to T and the definition part.
Yeah.
T. An MBI is of any policy that provides a financial incentive to elicit specific behavior. PCNA 20 market-based environmental policies by creating an incentive to reduce emissions. The criterion is that it provides a financial incentive to elicit specific behavior from those responsible for it. For pollution, the standards are first off-ground, educated public, and necessary for good execution of the policy. And next, they overlimit it's just cabinetry.
Go wherever you are.
Yeah.
Reasons to reject. Yeah. First part of the case, what is the current state of the US modernization?
We're still doing it.
Like, what are you modernizing? The one I makes claims that the US is modernizing certain.
We're
tribes.
saying the broader, so in the context of like our response to your evidence is just saying this broader strategy of modernization, which the US is still committed to, has prevented nuclear escalation.
Our evidence also talks about things like upgrading the Columbia class subs, right? The US is investing in those, but climate change will prevent them from actually being useful. Okay, thank you. The green paradox card, Frank's. What discount rate does Frank's assume? You've said that the discount rate just cannot be greater than the one that's normal means of the F. A discount rate is the market map. Right. If you don't know the answer, it's fine. One that our card assumes one that's sufficient.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
Frank, for talking about it and defending carbon tax against.
That doesn't answer my question at all. Who develops CPWs?
All of our state actors.
North Korea. I think
Non-state
our
actors.
evidence outlines Russia, China, North Korea would be ones to deploy those, as well as NSAs would be more likely to try to develop them if the US didn't have a compelling deterrent. You got anything? Also Iran, probably. Iran. Here. Bailey, just want to make sure I understand the warning of this card. It says that a high demand from overpopulation leads to firms needing that high demand with an increased supply and innovations to meet needs, correct?
Yeah, that's in your weakness.
What other arguments does it make? Well, yeah, that's a reason why companies like eventually become sustainable within their innovations. Is to adjust to overpopulation, i.e. things like fossil fuels are finite. In order to preserve their profit margins, they would switch to renewable. I think I'm confused where this card talks about switching to renewables or to like things that cost less. This just talks. Well, I think it talks about innovations like ag productivity and fertilizers, things like the transportation sector, broad dematerialization. Okay, thank you. You read Hansen, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Guess who fights the alt?
Every capitalist.
Everyone. Okay, so every capitalist. Are we thinking like private capitalists? Are we thinking
Individual capitalists? We also said that the things like
Who qualifies as a capitalist?
So the people that you're saying are bad, like the companies, the military.
The entire military.
I think the government and the military is probably, yes, capitalists.
we also
And if
said
you
it's
disagree with
inevitable.
that,
Things like the
then-
competitive spirit and individualism are inevitable.
No, I know Kalitsky. I'm asking. about the
Especially when the alt is about class consciousness. Nobody's gonna buy into that because they already are committed to this.
Everyone who's not in those labor organizing groups in the SCWO you connect with.
Pretty good 2AC arguments, huh?
This is,
What do you mean? They
I'm
were?
reading the evidence and explaining what Kaletsky is.
These are all in our 2AC evidence and much better than your 1NC extrapolations and uncarded claims.
10. I don't have to. Next.
Not going to stand up.
Pretty good. You didn't read that T definition, but I would have said that.
You let your one of the savers.
No, I literally immediately corrected it.
Right.
Yeah, I did.
But then he doubled out.
No, I did.
did. You literally didn't have the leaking off.
Hey, are you ready for the, yeah, no, the impact is ground, it was right there.
Nothing. It's the internal way.
We disagree with you. Are you ready for the speech?
No.
Are you ready for the speech? Okay.
This one?
You know,
We are ready.
here we go.
Economic rationality determines case no longer remember accounts for market externalities like diminishing matter and energy yields, deforestation, loss of soil fertility, diseconomy to scale. All scenarios that stem from the claims to green transition, mass extraction, and recycling that internally turns case because their renewable development through profit maximization creates increasing entropy that destroys the ecosystem's ability to support life. That's the left evidence. The impact calc is wrong. Short-term risks are negative. The 2AC impact review on case at 2036. A quick collapse on account outweighs framing issue. Impact collapse on account is inevitable when the impact term flips triodiag framework. Our interpretations of one of these consequences or assumptions are competitive. Epistemology predetermines political choice descriptions of structuring economic conditions determine what type of political action we can and should take. Questions like what makes good energy policy and should it be led to efficient markets or ecological conscience are prior to fiat and determine implementation of planned capitalism as an ideology. Manufacturers consent by determining how and what we think about which means critique has the potential to reshape how we think and solely analyzing planned consequences versus all policy replicates the legitimacy of capitalism by prioritizing efficiency over value, proving that political adversaries are that is sufficient to win. That solves fairness and class better. One internally turns both assumptions. Produce more classified question of what fairness means. Policy making without critical inquiry maintains consistency and dispossession and equity to its predictable actuals limits their assumptions. And the central is the one to see so criticism be expected for inevitable. They incentivize process counterplans that really move the one to see so proliferate the SSU. To AC, to the next argument was due both links are often that disprove desirability of thresholds low for them because revolutionary age is finite, so they're only a risk that nationalized complacency with capitalism too. Nerd. Reject version of that full text. They argue irresponsibility to enable infinite 1 hour extrapolation, justifies African kill class, reject the team for deterrence, and 3 mechanisms this said the plan is counterproductive to base building. Hoover 19 productional class for environmental politics represents affluent minorities and the importance of science advocates argue for certain competency community not contest to mass based working class program to appeal society working based mobilized working class self for rejected terms. They rely on the opportunity cost logic with rational unity actor somebody maximize gains with the entire critique indicts and answers their evidence. The next term is simulation decided single out part of the after them against the K, which makes it fail. They get similar to active life size with Cabals. 2, reject the team for intrinsic currents and add the element of time frame. To the alternative, which we didn't do, the link debate, it's economic rationality. Their investment is that the belief that merely changes the price of emissions, fixes externalities, allows the invisible hand of the market to externalize environmental and societal cost framing argument. Any profit order is good argument will only be true in the long term because companies invest legal profits now to pay fines later. That zero's case and enforcement becomes ineffective. Heavy emitters know that fossil fuels are profitable, and the transition is not, so they use that money to delay it. That's what et al. And their investment in globalized taxes avert ecological crisis. Natural rational violence proves the perm DA Loman 20 Goldilocks price with the right tax. We are told like there's no rational basis in social companies to push down price high entropy goods. Attempt to raise the levels of preclude ecological crisis rationally burdened by violence prices must enable trade after the same profit. The impact turned proper. They dropped the root card. That means the turn that it doesn't matter because profit would just make warring inevitable. Uneven development and production maximization caused nuclear resource scuffles. It's the root cause of their scenario. It's because the Chen evidence says crisis deepen interstate rivalry, so their U.S., China, Russia triad scenarios will never escalate, will always escalate under capitalism. Entropy outweighs case. It reinvests in the essence market, weave impact turn. They have to articulate why it's not the same. First, scope. Warming cascades globally makes solvency impossible. As the societal collapse to probability, their inherently increase that market, increase negative externalities with regard to life, and that means it's inevitable under capitalism. Warming, winning a risk of unsustainably flip, try or die. We know capitalism is untenable, which means the choices between extinction or the risk of survival. Unsustainability is real. Their evidence is the only warrant is that we haven't died yet, which doesn't exclude the magnitude of the storm. The second one was productivity improvements, innovation backfire. 20, technological innovation enables us to use more chainsaw workers, cut down 10 times as many trees in the same amount of time. Even additional contingent fishing controls enabled. Great nature into production algorithm allow people to assume things they wouldn't detect. Innovation activities kept going up, make no sense more. Innovation will actually do the opposite and non-renewable inputs. 20 most renewable examples to recycle. 4% of food energy, 27% of building infrastructure growth through keep driving for the use of recycling, declining recycling costs money, give ever rising inputs and costs, maintaining quality, straight turning the accumulation evidence, increased consumption for renewables, offsets efficiency gains, very at all 19 technological plus we get totally able to compensate innovation right up to production, leaving degradation, change, innovation, all more extraction within establish sound new tech solution more durable is not saying using fossil fuels, but also deny the climate setting. Full energy use goes any using older energy use from also non-fossil fuel sources, place less than 1/4 of units fossil fuel counterpart in plastic pollution. Crash oceans biodiversity cause extinction, like it all. 20 oceans host plentiful over seekers that import economy on the world, but they provide food and survival and health of the sea solution. Existential challenges within the ocean is worsening plastic waste within 80% of living lives part of their single-use consequence massive global condition perspective microplastics enter this many organisms that kill the gas and potential attack malnutrition impairment death with plastic particles marine environment transport potential hazardous microorganisms affect human disease for human structure great chemicals and that turns innovation. 17 the common clubs of aquatic growth thriving for health operation wind water food wildlife goods and people just also pollute into oblivion with chemical and the future on the undermining immune system less solve ongoing existing the planet global states and breakdown and financialization starts growth ending financial crisis trend 20 global GDP growing with gap volume value the economy sustainable financial crisis dependent physical support from government strengthening side and integrated organizational banks to engage with that increase all the credit quality deteriorated market crash into political and terms and enthusiasm PE including balance sheets altitude regulators gave us boosted training and seconds with the multi-year exceeds 27 times GDP set financialization 5% of sector 50% unleashing the inflationary episodes invention less effective and collapse within 2 decades only deliberate shifts avoid style collapse sector 21 humanity is on collapse on track for collapse in 2 days if governments pursue economic growth business usual growth peak around 2040 then a sharp downturn but a global population will answer to be societal to the current state of the world line closer to be AU was not to like side on track for the alternative human societal economic growth change in values and transition to limits industrial output the alternative backlash like right-wing alienation and capitalist action produce unique for scale up they drop the knife evidence that says the alternative is popular now catalyze all this into a movement that combat capitalism at the level of institution and state we fiat party whose basic role as an educator that fascism grows from crisis but education as a form of recruitment creates organizing around common struggles experiences of struggle under markets that creates maintains forward organization progress capable of international political change the BCA solvency advocate and the 1A proves the Hunger shot evidence is in the context of diffusion by learning improving scale up if we win education it solves case instead of the humanitarian we still create innovation but no link to profit impact turn if parents show negative polio vaccine with patented R&D it's financed by anonymous donors. The USSR was a medical tech frontier in the 70s, Cuba, and biotech now, and we lost the space race. And winning sustainability proves only the alt solves pricing externality cycle. Excuse me. 21, a problem for price on nature workings and outside of the extent price when internalized costs will pinch off growth. There's no capital government as a regret internalizing costs and tolerate capitalism. We should put the economy circle as possible to growth, make it unnecessary different best either. In the post-growth economy, they said transition. Impossible, wrong. 1, fiat solves, tests our ability to have no. 2, we see argument about fiat, so we certainly get it. And the 1AR can't get into ones. 2, the shift there was all now to worsening climate breakdown, financial capitalism reform failure that makes house less desirable, anti-cap war. That's the NIAC evidence. The first warrant in the Hansen evidence was the military, the members of the artillery would also be in the military because the same members that the kind of evidence says are satisfied with capitalism. There's next argument transition wars. It won't be violence, so there's no impact. We won't nuke ourselves. Secondly, at least get de-empowered, which only is back task Tupla as an imperative for the transition after the oil price to 100 self-sustaining localized economy. And fiat solves it. It changes only capitalist structures, which includes military members. So scale controls the eternal and will straight turn it. Hathaway 15 competent war with violence is abstract and health. Education is when it doesn't spice keeps on going back to physical rallies war capitalism inherently but demands growth. That one goes under the traffic with color war and we're going to continue thinking with people. Public control for lasting Pete's Kolesky rejected its psychoanalysis, which is totally bullshit. So you should default to the impact debating. Next argument, it's about soup kitchens and riots, not the alternative, which is political organizing. They also dropped the cooperation evidence on case. Their only answer was that people are not, which is incorrect. The evidence says that treaties prove humans work together and that means that you have negativeness and competition not hardwired. Raymond 20. Many believe markets are most efficient ethical ideology care for home economics are an assumption that human nature has been discredited by multiple scientific evidence human market by public cooperation doubles back what much whether by genuine consent innate capacity of collectivism not human nature is self-fulfilling property of market capitalism not through the alliance much more not just independent organized leftists with budding pleasure and skyrocketing economy all sun these out markets can't solve the climate Jevons paradox or gorilla 20, the invisible hand comes up against the open paradox of gains result in increased demand air travel result efficiency in aircraft. That spread to developing countries and become more energy intense. Total emission in the US falling into undermined emission by China and the Middle East. And efficiency is not the solution to everything. 17, efficiency is not working. Of depletion, extinction, acidification, pollution, and occurring after the gain efficiency nearing thermodynamic maximum of paradox falling positive. So increase in use of growing any resource contribution, increase in demand, 6,000, no increase in efficiency, band large increase in the cross efficiency, airline travel, now putting 17 no efficiency, glazing, missing the green light without and waste gets outsourced. The zero waste economy drives more consumption. Vanilla and bomb 17. Waste will keep increasing exponentially. Waste management can only transpose to marginalized territories. Zero waste loss resulting in fetishes of the desire to consume intensely and keep the wasting into the leftover parts and energy paradox that would require the price of essential resources to asymptotically drop to zero, which means transition is tanked. Murphy 22. If we demand growth in energy, decoupling is necessary. Overall energy requirements continually decrease. The obvious consequences of energy policy are heavy like transportation, food, heating, cooking, manufacturing, demand ever falling faster. Why did this? Arbitrarily cheap, we can buy them off or pay the hefty price of people. Only in the hour for you. And dark party can this happen to that really go in scale. They didn't like that people were much more than the scale, which happens to have essentially visible. The physical saturation. So let's see.
That's fine. Ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Reasons to reject the team. Just the
Terms
terms
without
stuff.
tax. Yeah.
Okay. And then second question, framework. One of these consequences or assumptions. Does that mean we get to weigh the consequences of the AF versus our assumptions?
You have to justify fiat to weigh those consequences.
Why? You said
We have, we've made an argument about fiat.
I know you've made an argument about do we get to weigh our AF?
If you justify that your consequences through fiat are good, you have to first
Okay, so
justify.
if we win
You have to
half,
first justify that fiat is something that we should care about.
why is fiat bad?
We've made the argument that fiat doesn't ask questions like what is good energy policy or what kind of assumptions it should be wed to, which means
How?
that it's sort of like a serial policy failure argument.
Well, why?
The argument, it's the entirety of the impact term, basically.
Those are words. This means nothing. Do we get to weigh our AF? Like, who cares if we fiat it? You've said consequences matter. Do consequences matter?
Or assumptions.
Or okay, that's
Okay, the alternative, you said you fiat the party whose basic role is an educator.
Yeah.
And they're unifying around common experiences. How do you know that the people that are being educated by the party will all identify the same common experiences and won't like go into like factional disputes?
Well, you didn't make that argument, but we also think that.
That's the transition.
We also, do you want me to answer? We also think the con evidence says that they have the same types of dissatisfaction, long hours, low wages, inability to consume.
Yeah, so even if they have the same type, how do you know that they'll recognize those and organize around them? Just
we
because the
think that
party
that's
tells them to.
That's the role of education. We think that.
How do you, but my question
That
is, how do you know it
education
works?
is effective insofar as we teach all those people that the root cause of those dissatisfactions are because of capitalism and fascism.
Right, but you've hinged the solvency of the alternative around this type of collective organizing and collective planning. How do you know that the people that are being taught to organize collectively will actually do it?
That's okay. Another
only
argument,
the
another
institution that
argument that
teaches
we've
people.
made is that your 1AC solvency advocate says that we can diffuse the BCA by learning, which proves that
That's a very, very
learning
specific
allows us
empirical
to
analysis of
scale
the
up.
effects
working with
of
others.
implementing a carbon tax policy on other countries around it. So it's not really.
Well, it's the same internal link,
applicable,
right?
but I
It's
have a
about
question about the
working with
transition
others.
no.
other
It's about
people.
if
It's
one
not, it's
country
about-
adopts a carbon tax.
It's
No,
about working
no.
with other entities,
no,
educating
over
them.
carbon tax. Move on.
No.
Yeah.
Eric has another
The
question.
transition war stuff.
Yeah.
Did you read the Hathaway card?
I read everything in the doc.
Okay, the transition won't be violent, won't make ourselves, I guess that's kind of the same question I was asking earlier. How do you know that people won't, I guess, like diverge into different interests?
What do you mean diverging different interests?
Like start fights within the party, like try to leave the party,
We think that
which
we-
causes a war.
like, well, first of all, part of the argument under fiat is that the party is like a coalesce, right? If
But
you think
you've
that,
only fiated the
if you think,
institution.
if you're
that
gonna make
educates
like
people, not
backlash
the
arguments,
organization.
we've answered those. Yeah. Okay, I totally need to send this part, I'm sorry.
You're fine. There's so actually 2 seconds.
I'm gonna just add them to the bottom of that doc. Okay.
Mine's right after us. It's gonna be case.
Right. I'm gonna start. Climate resilience is a school. DOT allocating funds for climate infrastructure simulation simulations already taken the crown of it, and winning climate resilience and now zero's case means the status quo can solve their internal links, so you can't put like a presumption. But for our authors, the most recent and some of the DOD most recent reliant because private news more reliant on private news outlets because they have the insider info and be skeptical when our explanations. Airdrop deal paying when it needs it. They read the card for me. Proves that deterrence fails to check a conflict or miscount. Purple to EC Tetris 11 exception is showing you paying Island 2011 11 with limited character to attack location in the maritime now recognized by poaching as part of South Korea territory. Intervening actors also proves Eric dropped it. Card proves that a limited strike was resolved via diplomacy despite high tensions with no covenant being in the region. The modernization frameworks exist. USCC 24 to 27 common national plan federal government build a more resilient future combining data and projections to assess exposure to assess the common hazards and diminishing of the risk of facilities and supply chains and maintaining adaptation to budget and deploying a budget formation. Air the military has been adapting since the 40s, varying at 17 late 40s Arctic temperatures, warning the U.S. military built bases radar stations government documents to show the 60s showing that the Pentagon supported to climate research to boost national defense military seen commentaries to the threat of the Navy. Built to also restore dumps in the Ashlands will avoid a flooded settlement. Someone's avoiding the move fossil fuels because of the cost saving energy dependency on the warming stuff. Status goes feedback loops and tipping points wrong. 40 degrees is stable district escalatory studies. We conclude the temperature stabilizing more get worse even if the rate of warming classification and current emissions stable to their own card says extinction by 2036 and Eric agrees with me. And more defense doesn't take out the K. No renewables, clean innovation and status quo. The one to see which is 14 proves that a carbon tax independently leads to innovation causing first to divest from oil cells at higher rate burning all reserves pushing emissions over the tipping point turns the K. The only answer to the green paradox was embarrassing in the context of the EU and only assumes the growth rate assumes that the growth rate of 5% is greater than the discount rate, which is exponentially higher because that's why companies lose all fossil resources and bets that companies will have to abandon the resources and sell it off at disproportionate rates in the immediately post plans, which causes higher emissions. Innovating it early triggers the green paradox. No, okay. Turn. Fast, independent innovation independently causes extinction. Advanced AI, biology, robotics, etc. To power the green transition to create and exacerbate multiple experts. Albert says synthetic biology has high roles and outcomes that overcomes vaccine, bioweapons, spread of cyber vulnerabilities, intensify with increasing networks and diseases and ignited nuclear apocalypse. All done to this guy's a fault and fast green tech and the fourth industrial revolution of FRA, green lights and technology therapies, which turns and outweighs case because it causes deterrence breakdown as countries become more incentivized to attack one another and authoritarian regimes and cyber collapses breakdowns social response to culminates extinction back in 19. The water and both healthcare and electricity telephones are fundamentally the modern extinction. Their has made a critical infrastructure more fragile than the one critical sector because cascading effect lead to large scale cyber catastrophe permitting and malicious actors to attack and insulate themselves in a vital control system greater intertwining the function to provide a multilateral coordination could lead to worldwide distributions and on the line. Yes, the plan speeds up the development of innovation. Bailey proves that they defend innovations to meet energy demand and other things that means the transition the green transition cannot be decoupled from green innovation. Other countries is wrong. China, you are ahead of the market now, but it's not that high. They made US key warrants for global renewable adoption and innovation. Otherwise, a neg valid on presumption. Even Eric is right about good innovation. They don't do good innovation. Fully says innovation includes unnecessary risks, new ways, sustainability, green tech, energetic regulation, AI, quantum. Yeah, I'm going to move on. No intervening actors. They don't check easily, but they can adapt to increasing innovations at a higher rate. On the next argument, yes, warrants about how fast Albert says and it's attempting to create solutions that first new innovation is different from the past financial. I did that above. Innovation slow now across the board. Park 23. Innovation activity is slowing in the study documented declining of research productivity. Semiconductor, pharmaceutical, other fields. The papers about it to big great applications government less novel across the fields of scenarios. Let's sharp that figure to plot that average CVs for a paper to found its average CD to decrease to 0.38 to 0.03 for drugs and the medicine. The patent is robust and that's just when it changes the publication off real practices. Cut that card of practices. I'm gonna move on to the link wall because yes, it's about a carbon tax is done. To overview of rapid green tech innovation post ash bills over to biological applications. The cascade is going to move on to the Simmons card, which says the carbon tax makes profitable invested biological engineering. Simmons at all 24 commitments on the Paris Agreement to make it radical discontinuing and lowering it will prevent unattainable sources of community might enable the possibility of advances in biology, some also synthetic include gene editing and themes application impact on environmental biotech and energy and feasibility deployment to contribute to the managing of common of bioeconomy applications to deployment of high risk applications to benefit avoiding the GHGs that attract the pricing of private funding unless a policy intervention make them more profitable. Taxing companies one measure to increase support for developing into simulations. And the IRA argument, IRA is company Trump not thumped in innovation that stalled over 1 year after somebody's in. Second is that Kim is just about biotech doesn't apply AR bio on talks, so don't let Mac get cross-apps. And three is that fast innovation fails to solve warming SDS. Evidence says that it solves complete. Okay.
more case stuff. Drop the WMD prolif is 0. That's Kimball, which says that international agreements prevent prolif because countries don't want to be sanctioned or face aggression from one another. And also on the nuke war stuff, Eric dropped it. Whoops, the only scenario for extinction with nuclear war. No answers, no new answers in the 1AR. The block system base made off it. Which we see focus. That's key to fairness and caution and education to get the first and last speech. Anything else is unfair and it makes a debate skewed to the app. Nuclear war won't nuclear winter won't happen. Scientific justifications are scant to based on skewed data. This much less hash and falls out the atmosphere much faster. The cooling is slight and temporary. Even its existential framing would be impossible because even a 30-degree pockets could survive that slide. And magnitude is 0. And first, they dropped that countries would only shoot 1 to 2 nukes, or just turn into nuclear winter. And
No new arguments moving.
no new arguments. Already did that. But solvency takeouts. The 1C Adler proves that the plan relies on audits and open information on limiting unnecessary information. Yes, they had evidence. It's in the 1C. What's evidence independently of circumstance case getting information delays and distortion means the EPA doesn't have enough information to implement the plan properly or account for negative externalities. As corporations leverage resources to keep secrecy, leverage PR cases and publicly faulty studies. The EPA cuts means they can't do it anyway. And there's a solar entrepreneur that has motive to support solar articles and brought that article before Trump 1.0 prefer contextualized evidence from the 1C and air dropped elasticities. Econ 101. Norway had the highest carbon tax, but emissions increased by 78% because demand for electricity remains the same and there's no cheap solutions being sent in elastic and immune to market regulation and changes. The 1C token about 20. We've created either the 1AR can agree that they don't lead to innovation and get out of the turn, but also not able to solve case, or the 1AR can get up and say they do lead to innovation and just about out of the turn.
I'm going to try.
No.
What do you want?
You right. No, that's good. Just write
I mean,
that.
that's what I assume.
And then when you're done with that, right at the top.
Yeah.
You read those conversation notes
Um.
after like the.
Yes. Yeah. I just want to double check.
That makes sense. Pasting them, okay.
Do you rather go to the bathroom now or?
That's good.
There's anything else in
Family trip.
Rick. Hey, Rick. What? I like how you write just flow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So excited for you to say that.
I know you are. Oh, if you want it.
Yeah, man. I do want to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't try a lot. I had the links at the bottom. I'd make that. I want that.
You put them right above the right after frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Ready. No.
Sorry. Let's go. Come on, okay. Good now. What?
Yeah.
What is this?
No resilience. I dropped all of our examples. Sea level rise, flooding, wildfires, etc. Destroy all infrastructure. Key to be able to deploy the triad, especially from key bases like Kings Bay and Whiteman. Their evidence is about buildings for personnel, not actual assistance in their deployment. Air negative. Deterrence theory is true. They're one example. It's not disproven. It did not escalate in our scenarios. Or about revisionist actors like Russia, China, NUCO, etc., which all overcome intervening actors to some assume deterrence collapse, and no card equals air affirmative. Our evidence says modernization is irrelevant if you cannot deploy it from the actual sites like Whiteman and Kings Bay. No evidence in context to those. Yes, tipping points near carbon emissions insurance irrecoverable by 2030, but they dropped it destroys air, water, land, etc. in the process, which independently are existential, will culminate in resource wars that blow up the escalation ladder, and independently go nuclear. No green paradox of transition. They transition quick and offset to renewables, which prevents fire sales because they still have the profits they need. Our evidence is assumptive and says that the case overwhelms. Plus, they do not assume a BCA, which ensures global emissions reductions rapidly and solves terminal impact. We turn every direction of the innovation arguments. Deterrence collapse, green lights, conventional, and CBW pro-left, including cyber attacks, which means they have zero external impact. And we have a terminal impact filter. There's no black swans. No terminal explain plus deterrence caps it. Off switches means they will be built in, and development is super long off. Plus the it's not non-unique. The IRA, or it is non-unique. The IRA spikes green tech. No F for Trump. Plus, it should have happened before, or Prue's time frame is super long off before the bioweaponization, etc. No innovations resulted in that, which means that they have no impact, and it is key to solve warming and deterrence, which outweighs the one to see. Crossix was also clear that their own innovation evidence said, quote, nuke use causes apocalypse, which was the question I asked JMO about terminal impacts, which means they have double turned themselves and they cannot take facts. We've conceded that argument from their 1 and C and said that is the only terminal impacts and why we cap it. Nuke war obviously does cause extinction. Durable fiat solves their EPA arguments. We get implementation and enforcement elasticity. It's irrelevant, doesn't assume a BCA, plus the rising nature of the tax slashes emissions immediately. Okay. We are impact turning the overview. Economic rationalities are good. That was above on case. Any risk we are right outweighs the risk we are wrong. You can only die once. So the perception of deterrence collects green lights existential wars much faster than their impacts. Go to framework now. Their interpretation inherently means that consequences matter and we should get to weigh the after. Inevitable and proven by every impacts chain that they have to go for, i.e. X leads to Y leads to Z. Fiat is good and we are defending our epistemology proven by all of our impact terms, which is the only thing they get to. They cannot shape subjectivities, all causes like family, religion, etc. Overdetermined plus switch side debate disproved. They have no offense. We have not impact turn. Only way links against the plan's fiated implementation. It is key to fairness. Their model allows infinite critiques of the app that nullify our ability and move 9 minutes to the 1AC, eliminating all of our ground. It is intrinsic impact since debate is a game. They provided by speech time, didn't click, etc. The links. First, no perm theory. There's a reason to reject the argument, not the team. Perm had a text. There's no right line for what one is. Economic rationality is non-unique, and if they're right, we have impact on them. The IRA, EU, CBAM, Paris, etc. all have maintained global market-based solutions to climate change, but they have not been enough to solve tipping points. The app just gets the US on board and ensures we do. The impact debate case outweighs and turns their entropy arguments. Innovation and green tech solves all of them. Think of the world post-app as green capitalism, but only with the right economic incentives, i.e. pricing in carbon. Cap prevents environmental degradation, and the growth environmental trade-off is wrong. Profit and economic incentives means companies will shift from finite fossil fuels since they will inevitably crush their profit margins. The alternatives, abandonment of such economic tools, seeds humanity's ability to adapt to existential climate change. Yes, sustainability and no backfire. World economic growth reduces the pace of poverty. Overconsumption is declining and not fixed. Incentives for innovation spur tech for things like ag productivity via fertilizers, transportation, and ensuring dematerialization. They've also dropped from the Bailey card that wars become rarer because countries are economically interconnected and disincentivized for military aggression, which answers the bottom of the 2 in our ranting. No accumulation, straight turn. Sustainable development solves their warrants. There is an imperative for capitalist nations to reduce capital accumulation and enhance sustainable development. Sustainable outcomes are overcoming and outweighing accumulation, plus capitalists are embracing resource management practices which solve. Recycling is true and solves waste. Dixon Peters, 24 solar panels, 95% of the value can be recycled. Reducing waste source systems are as well. Batteries and metals can be indefinitely. 80% of wind turbine is made up of recyclable materials. R&D and related recycling continues to grow. Products contribute to circular supply chain, and we solve plastic pollution and chemicals. Those industries are super carbon intensive via things like transportation and their processes. The only terminal is BioD and ecosystem breakdown, which is obviously solved by a case. No financialization or collapse. Also answers the overview rant. Trim 24-minute uncertainties, market found optimism, several key factors, conditions are currently more accommodating and resilient to earnings, improved environmental conditions, and lower financing data showing remarkable resilience, recent cabinet strong. The labor market and consumer sector also showing resilience, market participants expect growth even if they win a long-term sustainability takeout. There's a short-term collapse via which causes war and extinction. Transitioning to renewables and pricing carbon via market mechanisms is key to U.S. deterrence and go to the alternative now. The 1A sees a massive disad collapse of deterrence assures all-out nuclear war that happens much quicker than the all can peacefully transition. That was the entirety of the case debate. This is solely a question of who solves climate change faster. We are winning. We undoubtedly do, and their straight turn is wrong. That was above on Bailey. It does not solve. Our evidence is clear that only pricing in carbon facilitates the quick transition that LCI to stop tipping points. Our evidence is optimistic about some random class consciousness utopia that will never happen in time. 08 and other economic shocks didn't weaken, and their momentum in the SWO is obviously fractured. They haven't explained how they fiat a super collective movement to solve all of this, and if they do, then a perm do both would obviously overcome all of it, or it can't solve the status quo, which also doesn't link to any other theory arguments. Lastly, extend the Hansen evidence. Halting capital accumulation requires either a coup or election campaign, which both terminally fail. Military backlash and crackdown. So revolution plus elites would maintain power. There's no reason they would cede to some labor organizers now, which they already have power over, obviously, if they're fractured and not connected enough to take down capitalism now.
All right, we have 7:30. Yeah, I want this. You think so?
I think that makes
Yeah.
more sense.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, it's almost two things. I'm guessing.
Okay, in the case. Anybody not ready?
Economic rationality causes the market towards extra opportunity that causes extinction, resulting market externalities to ensure their interlinked scenarios are inevitable under capitalism, not fix, try, or die. Because market externalities are the next question of debate. No evidence accounts for the diminishing matter energy yields, deforestation, soil fertility, chemical emissions that cause that it's interlinked the impact that zero their impact on because it takes out their internal link insofar as they dropped. If we win sidal collapse, it means they can't solve the case because there's no way for them to resolve innovation. It flips, try, or die. It makes the debate a question between past consciousness or collapse independently. They drop that it makes price signals insolvent. Profit motives make price signals insolvent, so they can't weigh their offense. The Woods evidence says companies take legal profits, invest them, and then pay fines leading to externalized consequences. The one I see cross-sex says that the only impact of not paying the tax now would be paying more later. Our Woods evidence says that DuPont proves it can do it and still maintain profitable because of the amount of money they would get from investing those profits preferred over their advocates on qual. They dropped the one in our author index because they don't have degrees or citing studies, but Woods has an honors degree in economics from the University of Canterbury and Master Public College from UC Berkeley. So you have to they're negative at worst. This is a reason that the alternative solving has to be super low framework. It doesn't matter. Concede they meet if they win consequences. Means it's a question of the impact turn, but also they said the fiat is good, so we get it too. The only a risk of the link. They've explicitly defined economic rationality. The overview, which negative evidence sense fixes the invisible hand of the market to drive a strange condition that increases rationality, which is certainly unique because the Allen evidence says that trains individuals and institutions to expand the profit order mentality, which we've externalized negative consequences. In Turns case, that was the overviews, plus the 2AC read a definition that defended they were an MBI, so they certainly linked to our profiteering argument. The impact turned proper and entropy outweighs this thing. Sustainability flips try or die. That was done above 1 AR starts warming turns, no warrant, no line drawn between chemical emissions or plastic getting into your system. And renewable / warming means it's really external. They've only answered biodiversity and ecological collapse, but not our external and existential offense, which is good enough to vote on because we have defense to warming and nuke war, but they have no defense to our impacts. They said resource management is coming now. No evidence for this. It's just an analytic. Our evidence says that it's unprofitable, so they wouldn't do it. They said recycling the Dixon piece of evidence is only about REEs, not plastic, so it's a non-responsive. No impact to REEs anyway, so it's not net offense. They said we solve plastic because it's carbon intensive. No evidence air negative because it's profitable. Our evidence says that plastic is accumulated in human bodies now. Because it is profitable, it can be made with things other than fossil fuels. So there's their answer is wrong. No financialization doesn't matter. No one read an econ impact. I don't think they said if you want long-term sustainability take out, short-term take out now. That's wrong because do we see over to double down that warming is by 2036 plus a risk of our defense on pace means that our offense outweighs one probability. Their inherency agrees the market is incentivized because fossil fuels externalize consequences without regard to life because that profiteering in SWO is leading to the emissions under fossil fuels, which proves it's inevitable under cap, scope, wastes, chemical emissions, deforestation, externalized expended overview, globally, and collapse society. Remember that zero is case because it makes the green transition improfitable. Independently, if they go for only time frame, they've dropped that waste is rapidly increasing now. Plastic is already getting into our system. The 2NC evidence says it's worsening, which independent the 2NC evidence says it's worsening now. So there's only a risk of our evidence. They double drop the root cause evidence. They agree that resource wars is resource wars on case that is internally to that as profit motives. Uneven development production maximizes call those scuffles. It's the root cause because the Chen said it deepens interstate rivalry. So their rant about Russia and China doesn't matter. The alternative proffer vote negative for clash consciousness as a revolutionary perspective that capitalizes education into organization. They agree fiat is good. We fiat the party whose basic role is an educator. Fascism grows from crisis. It scales. They dropped its scales because it's the same reason as their 1AC evidence resistant to capitalism based upon common experiences plus agreeing with education it solves case dropped Hegel evidence just post-growth economies internalize the cost of externalities avoid warming because incentives are humanitarian. Only we have empiric. Polio vaccine wasn't patent R&D is financed by donors known as USSR's medical tech frontier Cuban biotech. Two framing arguments for the alternative. None of their evidence assumes fiat, which is good and prior for the framework like that, and it doesn't also mean the perm because incorporation both trades off with education and scaling because the revolutionary energy is finite. Last, the transition war is yes, straight turn. Warming is inevitable. From resource conflicts, they agree done above because the profit root cause means only the outsolves by switching humanitarian incentives drop. No impacted them because we won't nuke ourselves. This is a non-starter for the 2AR. Lastly, their only arguments are about the military. They dropped it solves it because NIAC and common evidence both price in that people are dissatisfied with wages, working hours, ability to consume. This is magnified in the military, which is a 2NC analytic they didn't answer to, which means that part of fiat includes workers out of the military. So we are basically we're winning the outsolves case. Only to do two things on case. Go there now. Green Paradox takes out their only impact. It turns warming itself now and only the all bullshit winner proves that company will sell all of their assets upon carbon tax. Less the discount rate is less the interest rate. Econ 101, the discount rate is at which they lose money. The interest rate is at the rate they increase to 1 hour's clear. Every firm would sell all the resources now to avoid the increase in 5% at the end of the year. Increase emissions exponentially and turns warming, even if you're not buying it. It is a terminal solvency deficit. Plus the Norway evidence went dropped, which says they increase emissions by 78%. Which is the only empiric in the speech because of elasticity. There gets no new arguments. Plus, don't let them way there to the new cross applications. The BCA, they said BCA not an answer. Fuels will be burned domestically, so the BCA doesn't solve. Plus, we win that renewable transition creates externalities of entropy, which means that if they cause transition abroad, it links to the impact turn. There's something about a turn. No offense here. We're kicking out of it. The green tech development is too slow, so it doesn't escalate. The only impact is nuke war. The nuke war proper. The defense is terminal. There was no 2AC concession. They flat dropped that. There is no nuke winter because of scientific justification based on skewed data. There's much less ash. It falls out of the atmosphere. It's light and temporary. Even if there is, it's not existential. So small pockets of humans would still survive. Double drop that countries only shoot 1 to 2, which means there's not that much ash. The only thing they said was obviously it's true. Protected new answers. This use block prep after things were always done because whoever make up some BS. It's key to clash and fairness. Plus the alt solved it, so it doesn't matter anyways.
750.
Yeah, case in the UK. Alright. Extinction from nuclear war outweighs deterrence. They drop things like sea level rise, flooding, and extreme weather, which destroy key military bases and have the ability to deploy the nuclear arsenal, which means it's not credible anymore and makes extinction from miscount, weapons failures, and proliferation inevitable because of crisis escalation that nobody is able to respond to because their arsenals do not work. Subs are specifically key to agent security because of their survivability and undetectability, which they have no response to, which means that there will be mass proliferation in the region without it. The only defense in this scenario they extended was that nuke winter means that there's no extinction from it, but that's not sufficient to into the unprecedented amount of new actors that can launch way more nukes that can launch way more nukes than just like the 8 or 9 countries that have them now, which means that their evidence is not sufficient defense when they have not explained why it applies to a situation in which an entire region has its own nuclear arsenal, is ready to use them against anyone who acts against them, especially when they are already perceived to be in a weak security environment. Weak security, when they're already perceived to be in a weak security environment because of the failing U.S. arsenal, which means that it's vastly increased risk of use, especially because of the erosion of nuclear weapons, which means that which means that people will definitely launch more nukes because they do not know how big how big the incoming attack will be, so use their entire arsenal. The next argument is green paradox is nonsense because the plane transitions, and the Deterrence said that people sell assets, but not that they actually burn them, so they don't have an impact on what to explain what actually prevents solvency. Even if they sell the impact to get they sell their resources to get the money back. They invest that into renewables, which means the transition is inevitable anyway because they will pay for the tax. They said in elasticity, but then actually explain the argument. The tax rises year over year, and impact of the argument. The tax rises year over year, and green tech gets cheaper, which means that the price makes renewables more cost effective, even if inelasticity is true, which is all we need to win. The transition works. They also said the tech is too slow, but there's no warrant for it because and it's fast because our evidence cites the best studies from people in the field that said that emissions will fall and tech increases. They have dropped things like empirics from our studies that say to fall generally, which means even if they are right about even if they sound convincing about the implementation part, they're just right about the actuality of the situation.
And their 1 and C terminal for innovation says nuclear causes apocalypse.
Yeah, the 1 and C terminal for nuclear war says it's cause apocalypse, so they have contradicted themselves, and we conceded that, and which means that the evidence, the argument is guaranteed. The critique, short-term crises come first, and there's no shot anything comes before nuclear war. The only answer to this argument, the true was about warming, but that's not our impact. Nuclear is fast and unpredictable, so only the plans fast action can mitigate warming to solve. There is zero solves argument for this specifically because it's a short-term scenario, and they have not explained the speed or scope of the transition from the alternative, which means they cannot solve it. They haven't explained how they change resource management, the resistance to sustainability, which means it's either slow or definitely, which means it's either too slow to to protect the nuclear arsenal is not targeted towards it, so the U.S. can adapt to it, or it fails inevitably because they have not explained to you what the scenario actually looks like, which means that the time frame and actual arguments definitely, the case outweighs here, even if that will hypothetically reduce emissions eventually, because it is not targeted to protect the nuclear arsenal and doesn't do so fast enough. Now, in the sustainability debate, they have dropped too many warrants to prove that unsustainability broadly, especially when there is an existing shift to sustainable development that the plan commits to it by forcing the U.S. to price in the cost of emissions. Read the evidence. All of their evidence, all of their sustainability evidence assumes an aggressive development strategy that prioritizes profit over anything else. Even other arguments about economic rationality, which their link hinges on, are assuming this actuality. What you should prefer an assessment of how the world actually is now versus how they describe it, which means that their concession of things like commitments to low-income countries, then to investments in low-income countries to equalize development across the world, that create a global imperative to rein in capital accumulation. When things their argument is wrong about the status quo, and it's definitely wrong about the case when we force the U.S. to commit to a strategy that divests from a profit maximization strategy. That means the case certainly outweighs for solving fast emission reductions, which is sufficient to solve the protection of the nuclear arsenal, and it makes the alternative pointless because the quo is already solving ideologies to profit maximization. But even if they are right, there's still no link to the plan because the carbon tax is inherently committed to reining in production and energy output by pricing in emissions externalities, which hampers the economic rationality and American growth that their link relies on. But it's inevitable anyway because they have dropped things like the individualism and the competitive spirit that have proved that small scale things like riots and soup kitchens have not escalated to broader scale movements, and there's no reason that the institution, the party as an educational institution will actually solve that. Will actually solve that, and recycling solves it anyway because it makes development sustainable. It makes development sustainable by instituting a circular economy. There will be no more resource extraction, which means that there's no argument. Which means that there's no terminal impact. There's no terminal impact to energy development anyway, even if it continues expanding because it is circular and because it is circular and doesn't require the extraction of more profit and extraction of more resources.
We control the internal link to pump.
We control the internal, the plastic impacts. We control the internal link to it because it massively relies on fossil fuel production. They have said that plastic can be produced with other things, but have not explained what the scope of that production is, which means that most of it obviously will still rely on the production of oil and extracting things from the oil to produce the plastic, which because that was the first thing we discovered, and honestly it takes up most of the industry it takes up most of the industry, and they have not explained what we do otherwise. Now the alternative.
Extend Hanson.
That was the
Cuban military.
The alternative, extend the Hansen evidence. The alternative can either be an election or a coup, which both fail because which both fail and overcomes and circumvents fiat because they have not explained how the implementation strategy or effectiveness of the institution or the effectiveness of the institution after it has been implemented. Which means even if they are correct, even if they have fiat, it fails in actuality. Halting capital accumulation requires either a coup or election campaign with both failed military backlash and crackdown ends the revolution, plus elites will maintain power and people are already committed to individual strategies proved by the Kletsky arguments that they conceded.
Look at you guys.
Cool.
I should send you an email with one hour to whatever account.
So,
Yeah, just hit stop.
Hit
stop.
stop,
And then it'll do.
and then you click it.
Are you sure you want to stop recording?
Yep.